Well, I would like to say good morning to all, and welcome to another series of our talks here in Australia. We are a not-for-profit organization engaged in promoting and strengthening the trade relations between Australia and Brazil. It is my pleasure to be your host today. Before we proceed, I would like to mention a bit of housekeeping. First is that for those who are coming in, by default, your microphone will probably be on mute, and I would like to say keep it on mute unless you have a contribution or you would like to say something, and you probably will have your camera on off as well. You are welcome to bring your camera back in again if you would like to say something, or if you have any comments to the panel as we actually open the questions and so on. Each speaker will have a few minutes for remarks, and after all guests speakers have gone through, we'll have a moderator panel. Question and answer will be allowed at the end of the session. I would recommend you to use the chat in case that you would like to type your question ahead of time, and so that we can place that to the people who will probably be answering that. I would like to disclose that we have a limited time and for question and answer, but we'll do the best as we can to address all the questions. I would like to also say that the remaining questions that may be addressed in this forum in here, if we don't have the time to actually answer them online, we'll actually reply via email and communicate with our team later on. So this is our second series of our webinars, the B.Talks online. B.Talk is a series of events now created by the Australian Brazil Business Council, where participants have the opportunity to listen and to interact in an insightful talk with experts and authorities in the relevant fields of the international trade. In 2020, the event is also the occasion to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between Australia and Brazil, and therefore we would like to acknowledge the presence of our ambassador of Brazil in Canberra, His Excellency now Sergio Moreira Lima, who has been a tremendous contributor to the activities of the Council. This event also would not be possible without the support and the generosity of our sponsors. The Consul-General of Brazil in Sydney is sponsored this specific event. JBS Australia and Food Recycle. The event partners that we have are the Embassy of Brazil in Canberra, Austrade, Ibre, and Latam Airlines. We also would like to express our appreciation to all our members, board directors, and volunteers. The council activities would not be possible without the support of many generous people time and who contribute to us advising with the skills and with knowledge. So please talk to our team if you would like to know the benefits of becoming a member of this council. On today's B.Talks, we will be discussing agribusiness, animal protein and biosecurity, and technologies from Australia and Brazil that are contributing for the success and playing a vital part in the critical areas for the international trade between Australia and Brazil. I would like to hand over to the Australian Brazil Business Council Vice President Flavia de Souza to moderate and to introduce our guest speakers. Flavia is a practicing lawyer qualified in Australia and Brazil, and is the founder of the Oceania Legal, a commercial law practice based in Sydney. So welcome, Flavia, with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gleuto. It's a pleasure to be here to assist our council on this important time and subject. I think as our ambassador just well said, it's challenging times around the world and in Brazil, but despite that, I think it's very important that we continue focusing on the positive, what is good between Australia and Brazil, because there's a lot to talk about. And so I'm just going to jump straight in and to introduce our guest speakers this morning. Welcome Joaquim Penna. He's a Deputy Consul-General of Brazil in Sydney. and Head of Trade, Investment and Tourism Promotion Bureau. Rodrigo Lima, General Director at Agroicone. Johnny Berry, Head of Corporate and Regulatory Affairs at JBS Australia. Linda Woodford, Founder and CEO of AXIchain. And Dr. Norm Boyle, CEO at Food Recycle. And Brad Stebbing, Director of Food Recycle. So on behalf of the Australia-Brazil Business Council, I'd like to thank each one of you for your generous contribution with time and expertise and for being here with us with our B.Talk. Our first guest speaker, Joaquim Penna, is a career diplomat at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil and is the Head of Trade, Investment and Tourism Promotion Bureau, which is a department of the Consul-General of Brazil in Sydney. So welcome to B.Talks, Joaquim.
Thanks, Flavia. I hope you are hearing me well. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. And first of all, congratulations to the Business Council for hosting this series of events. I think of this series of webinars, there's a lot of interesting topics coming up, all of them very relevant issues in the bilateral relations between Brazil and Australia. The Consulate of Brazil in Sydney supports this initiative, and we think that is a really good way of celebrating the 75 years of bilateral relations, or diplomatic relations between Australia and Brazil. So, as the first one to speak, I would like to extend a warm welcome to the other panelists and to everyone watching. I hope that the content that we will follow will be of interest to everyone. Among the many important issues which will be touched upon along this series of webinars, today we will discuss agribusiness and particularly the question of animal protein and biosecurity. My plan here today is to just to provide some introductory remarks before my fellow panelists, which are much more specialized in the issues. We'll talk about the subject of the webinar in more detail. So, since I arrived in Sydney in 2017 and started working in trade promotion, it was a new experience for me. And agribusiness has been one of the main areas of interest of trade promotion in Sydney for Brazil, one of our main focus of attention. I thought then in 2017, and I still think it today, that the segment of agribusiness provides a rich material to develop the relationships, the business relationship between Brazil and Australia. So in 2018, together with the then Consul-General Carlos Henrique Mugin, we hosted the Australia-Brazil Agribusiness Forum, which was a very informal seminar. At the time, we had like physical webinars and you could meet people, which was a bit different from today that we are getting used to these online webinars. But the world has changed, and so we do what we can with this reality. So in 2018, we had this Brazil-Australia Agribusiness Forum, and specialists from both Australia and Brazil discussed the many opportunities for cooperation and collaboration between the two countries in this economic segment. In 2019, we went a step further, and we hosted another event called Brazil Agribusiness Innovation Forum, which tried to point out the possibilities for furthering the business relationships, especially among ag-tech startups from both countries. So it is a pleasure to be here today and to discuss the topic of animal protein and biosecurity, which are I think it's of interest to both Australian and Brazilian agribusiness people. Coming back to the 2019 forum, one of the results of this forum was the somewhat counterintuitive idea that although Brazil and Australia are both powerhouses of agriculture, of agribusiness, they are not necessarily competitors. There are many areas where Brazil could help Australia and vice versa. Areas of potential cooperation or collaboration with a great potential to make both countries stronger in the international scenario. And this, I think, it's even more true in a post-COVID-19 world. Nowadays, countries are trying to adapt or thinking of strategies to adapt on how to best adapt to this new world. And one of the main trends that we could see that many economists are expecting to emerge is a move towards diversification of clients, of business partners, so as not to be too dependent on one source of income or of one source of food products, of capital, etc. Another strong trend, I think although it's difficult to know how long it will last, is the search for food security, meaning here the security in food supply. I think this is an issue that for many years, countries with the old world that we had in the last few decades, countries are much more relaxed about thinking that food security was a given. But now I think because of COVID-19 and all the changes that the world has faced from there, food security, meaning the security of the food supply, become a very important issue. Based on that, will some countries become more protectionist, trying to secure food for their populations? Will other countries open their borders, on the contrary, to guarantee that there will be no food shortage? Mm-hmm. Sorry. These are interesting trends that we have to follow in the next months and years. But I think that we could assume that countries will more often than not look for reliable sources of food, both internationally and internally. And that presents an opportunity for countries like Brazil and Australia. I would say that it's an opportunity, but also a challenge, because there will be an increasing pressure for more stringent norms and standards in terms of food safety and biosecurity, coming out more to the themes and the issues of our webinar, including the control of pests. Issues like traceability will become even more relevant in this new world. So countries that could produce food and sell food, or have the know-how to invest in other countries to produce more food, quality new food, will be in high demand. Countries like Brazil and Australia. It's interesting at this point also to think about how is the recent performance of Brazilian agriculture. I think there was some uncertainty, or there's a lot of uncertainty about how the world will come up out of the COVID-19. But what I could see from the first few months of the year was that Brazil not only maintained its performance in agribusiness, but even got better. Even in the context of COVID-19, Brazil was one of the few countries in the world which managed to raise its exports of food products, to export more food products to the world, presenting record volumes, not only in export, but also in production of items like beef, pork, soybeans, and sugar.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for your remarks. And I'd like to hand over the word now to our second guest speaker, Rodrigo Lima. Rodrigo is a partner director of Agroicone, a leading organization on key agriculture and renewable energy, and dealing with the agendas of trade, environment, and sustainable development. So Rodrigo will talk about the challenges to promote food security and strengthen food security and safety in the post-COVID-19 time. So Rodrigo, welcome to B.Talks.
Thank you so much, Flavia. It's a pleasure to join all of you. First, I would like to thank the invitation from Australia-Brazil Business Council. It's really a pleasure to try to share some thoughts about the moment we are passing through and how different countries faces the COVID-19, but with a focus on animal protein and food safety that becomes again to gain a lot of weight at the international debate. So I think COVID puts a lot of weight at the food safety agenda, and this brings sanitary standards, biosecurity measures and controls, and how different countries approaches biosecurity, not just for in terms of exports, but for internal consumption. This is really a very important issue attached actually to the emergence of this pandemic. It's important also to highlight that zoonosis emergence it's a key common global issue. There are numbers that 60% of human pathogens are from animal origin, and how to handle this when we are dealing with different countries with different veterinary services and capacity and knowledge and technology, and this is huge, right? And so for countries like Australia, Brazil, and other big important producing countries that exports a lot of animal protein, this becomes has always been a huge agenda, but now it looks like there's a reemergence of all the sanitary agenda again, and this is one of the most important issues I would like to share. Sanitary status from the different countries and biosecurity measures, key producing countries like Australia, like Brazil, like the US, like Canada, New Zealand also, it's important from animal protein and so on, Argentina. I was just looking the numbers at the World Organization for Animal Health before we start, and from the 1st of June to today, here it's June the 3rd, right? And for you it's the 4th, but in 3 days we have 28 outbreaks reported to the OIE. Most of the very known diseases like avian influenza, the African swine fever, that are causing a lot of severe damages in Asia. In Russia, there was one case reported, or cases reported today. So when you look to the numbers, people that doesn't know this agenda, people that are that criticize a lot the consumption of animal protein, they become to be kind of totally defending, let's just stop eating animal protein, let's just stop producing. And this is becoming very strong here in Brazil. I don't know about Australia. It will be important to hear from you. And if we see a number like this, 28 diseases, outbreaks reported in 3 days, oh my God, we're all gonna die. And we that work with this agenda of producing animal protein, of taking care, adopting biosecurity measures, handling animal welfare, and so on, we are accustomed and used to face those diseases. So but this puts a challenge for every country. Brazil and Australia are very important producers of beef, for instance, right?
Yeah.
And fortunately, our sanitary status, Australia and Brazil, is very high in terms of the most challenging diseases affecting the animals. If we look at the key diseases in Brazil, we're free from. Our last case of foot and mouth disease was in 2005. A very particular case on a state neighboring Bolivia and Paraguay. We are free from avian influenza, and this is something that we must highlight, right? Brazil has compartmentalization cases already recognized by the OIE, which puts a higher standard of biosecurity in terms of poultry production, free from African swine fever, free from bovine spongiform encephalopathy, and so on. So, but the fact that we are free doesn't create a barrier that we will never face those diseases. And once you have one case detected, there's several companies here and who manages this agenda. Once we have one case detected, there's a huge disruption, especially when we are talking about big countries like Australia and Brazil. There's all the regionalization principle that is not always adopted, and then the compartmentalization and so on.
That's
so
so
I think
sorry, Rodrigo. I think you're very right, because it doesn't take you don't need two diseases. You only need one to spread very quickly in large countries like Brazil, Australia, and it doesn't take much to spread as we are currently seeing. I'm sorry to
for sure.
But in again, because we've got only 5 minutes for each panelist, so we can move on to the panel. But before we go, we'd like to ask you a question, Rodrigo, if that's okay, in respect to your great talk just then. Do you think you mentioned about stopping eating meat as a solution, or as a talk around to prevent pandemics? What do you really think this is a new trend, or something that people should start paying attention to it?
Here in Brazil, there's a lot of criticism about beef production and livestock production and climate change, right? And now with the pandemic, this trend is increasing, mixing climate change and the pandemic. And arguments, there's campaigns going on, shouting out, just stop producing, stop eating, that we otherwise we will not survive, which I personally don't believe. I do technical research, and my perspective is that we need to produce more effectively. We need to increase food security. And to be able to increase food security, we need to really strive our important countries and all the multilateral systems towards food safety. The OIE, the sanitary agreement of the WTO, now the WTO, all the things that are happening right now. So I think, as a final remark, that Australia, Brazil, and big important countries should drive the attention and the debates around food safety at the international fora such as FAO, WTO, and others, because this is a common agenda, and this is not the last pandemic, and how to manage and control. And we know that this pandemic actually emerged from wet markets and the consumption of wild animals and so on. And wet markets and cold chain and the consumption of wild animals are the last issues I would like to bring, because if we don't face those, wet markets are a huge problem in Asia and in Africa and some parts in North America. So so I think Brazil, Australia, and other countries should lead this debate.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Agree. Thank you. Thanks so much for your informative talk, Rodrigo. So now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, John Berry. John has been involved in the Australian meat industry over 20 years. He's the head of corporate and regulatory affairs at GBS Australia. GBS is Australia's largest meat, food and processor and feedlot operator. GBS Australia is a part of the GBS Group, which is the world's largest animal protein business headquartered in São Paulo, Brazil. Welcome to our B.Talks, John.
Thank you, Flavia. Much appreciated. Great to be part of 75 years of Brazil-Australian relationships. Very important, as previous speakers have said. I agree with opening comments from all participants. Food security and food supply is front and centre globally. And as a major provider of food to the world, the challenge is going to be around managing disease risk and also feeding the world in a sustainable way. Australia, for those who don't know, exports around 70% of its total beef production. In an average year, that could be 2.2, 2.3 million tonnes of production. We export as a country around to around 50 countries internationally. So for Australia, being a major exporter with a small population of 25 million, access to markets through strong, secure systems, having strong integrity in our industry systems are critical. Australia has very strong history in terms of these systems, traceability, animal identification systems from paddock through to plate. For JBS Australia, as the major beef processor and food manufacturer in this country, clearly the industry systems that underpin the Australian production are critical, but at the same time, we as a company are looking to extend those into servicing specific chains, markets, customers, etc. So more and more we will see the height of the bar move north in terms of systems, food security, and the demands from customers and consumers. As we know, people want to understand where their food comes from. Mm-hmm. And this presents a lot of challenges, but it also presents a lot of opportunities to ensure integrity throughout the supply chain. The other part of this is that from an Australian perspective, we go through various cycles as well. So, you know, we are a large island, but a large percentage of our country is semi-arid and faces prolonged periods of drought. So sustainable farming practices, sustainable animal management practices, the way we operate certainly brings with it challenges. We're not as blessed as Brazil with water and natural resources. Mm-hmm. Our production systems are predominantly grass-fed beef production on large plains. And from our perspective, we see the need for us to acknowledge the impact of climate change and how we, through our production systems, address that. And that's going to be through technology, investment, and capability. And for Australia, that's where we believe the opportunity is to differentiate our product to the world. So just those opening comments, Flavia, you know, we're proud Brazilian-owned business here in Australia. You know, we see the opportunity to grow product opportunities for not just Australia, but for the world. And I believe we're in a very good position as a country with our systems, but we shouldn't be complacent. We need to continue to move with technology and refine these systems to not just meet the demands of customers, but exceed those where we can in terms of differentiating our product to the world.
Oh, that's fantastic. We're certainly very proud of JBS and everything that's achieved in Australia and around the world, despite the challenges. And we would like, before we hand over to the next speaker, also ask you a quick question about how do you, what's the question? So how important do you think has it been the use and the discovery of new technologies for the meat industry?
Yes, it's a very good question. If you look at it from a headline perspective, the Australian beef processing industry is very high cost to operate.
Mm-hmm.
An average cost per head of processing, we're twice the cost of Brazil, and we're around 25 to 27% higher than that of the United States.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So from that cost base, we're focusing on where there is capability to implement advanced technology, whether that be within robotics and other technologies. Acknowledging there are limitations in terms of where technology fits to existing facilities, but Australia needs to look at its productivity, and yes, I believe is to the forefront of looking at those opportunities. In 2017-18, we invested significant resources into a robotics company, Scott Technology, based in New Zealand. We've adopted that technology throughout our facilities here in Australia, both in beef and lamb. Technological development and implementation in Australian processing is where we need to look at. At the same time, that's going to come with capital cost, but at the same time, for us to be efficient and in per capita terms, highly productive going forward, that's where the focus needs to be.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, John. Maybe perhaps our next guest speaker, Linda Woodford, will be able to add some further information as to this technology topic. Thank you so much, John. Now our next panelist, Linda Woodford. She's the founder of and CEO of AXIchain. It's an amazing technology startup company digitalizing commodity trading and supply chains, she focuses as well on enhancing the red meat sector. Before founding AXIchain, Linda managed a trading consulting company in Singapore for over 10 years, and her experience and network spans sectors from mining, agriculture, food, and beverage. So now Linda will share with us how AXIchain works. And I understand it is a business-to-business groundbreaking trading platform, a type of a marketplace for pre-vetted buyers and sellers from around the world. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Flavia. Thank you for that kind introduction. And first of all, thank you to the Australian and Brazil Business Council for putting together this webinar. It's a pleasure to be part of the panel with such a talented group of people. So first of all, thank you. So a little bit about AXIchain. So AXIchain, as Flavia mentioned, we are a startup company. We've been in business, we're a technology company, and we've been working on supply chain management. So AXIchain, when we set out, was to solve some problems in the end-to-end supply chain management process, particularly for export in commodity transacting. And to start with, we set out to solve three key problems in that area. And the first one is, if you're a small, medium enterprise or a small business, how do you find your next buyer or supplier? And so if you're a farmer standing in your paddock, how do you find an international buyer of your product? And how do you know for sure that that international buyer is going to pay for your product? And if you're a buyer, an international company, how do you know for sure that you're going to get the product to the specification that you require? Number two is the paperwork issue. So obviously commodity transacting and trading is a highly paper-driven industry. And in a beef commodity transaction, you can have up to 20 documents. And where you have a lot of paper, typically you have a lot of opportunity for fraud and failure within contracts and systems. And the third part, what we set out to do was cross-border payments. So instruments such as the letter of credit requires 10 steps, 4 banks, and it's slow and costly. and typically your foreign exchange rates around that are not fantastic. So AXIchain, it's a long story which I won't do here, but we ended up in the meat industry to start with. It wasn't our intended vertical to start with, but that's where we started with. And so because we ended up in the meat industry, we needed to add in things like track and traceability and authentication of data of that product. And I feel that that authentication and the track and trace, as I think John mentioned, is it's never been more relevant right now for food security. So AXIchain's technology actually starts in the farm, and we're building farm management tools, and these farm management tools capture the data that feed into our paperless system. And our paperless system has started with a product that's called the Mobile National Vendor Declaration. Now, just to give you a bit of understanding of how that works, so across Australia, there are 64.5 million livestock movements every year. And each of these movements require a document that's called the National Vendor Declaration. And so obviously, and typically the farmers, when they fill in these declarations, they're scribbled on and they're very hard to read. And John might be able to agree with me here, but my understanding is that most abattoirs, particularly the larger abattoirs, have to employ a number of staff to actually kind of decipher what information is on these documents. And so it costs the industry $163 million a year, according to the MLA, in poorly filled out national vendor declarations. So AXIchain has developed the leading mobile national vendor declaration. We're very excited. It's we're about to launch it, and it's fully mobile. And it's so it also means it's offline and online. So if a farmer is in a paddock, which can happen in the middle of nowhere and there's no cell phone signal, it still operates and works. And it also operates and works with the drivers, and then that data feeds into the abattoir. So it's a smooth process with clean data and no paperwork that is required. And so, wow. Yeah, so we're pretty proud of it. Yeah, so because things like, and coming back to the topic around food security, you know, because of diseases such as mad cow, swine flu, and now COVID, more people than ever want to know more about where their food has come from, the quality of the food, and the journey that it's been on. So AXIchain is tracking and tracing that product with up-to-date technology and delivering that on a blockchain system with some dynamic QR code processes for all users to capture.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Linda. I can actually see how this solution can really assist the industry in Australia, but around the world, in Brazil. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Congratulations. So
we're very excited.
We're very excited. That's for sure. We need to move on to our next two guest speakers. It's my pleasure to introduce our event sponsor, Food Recycle. Norm Boyle is the founder of Food Recycle and the inventor of a patent process for roadside bin and collection vehicle designs. And Brad Stebbing, he's an award-winning designer with a Bachelor of Industrial Design, focused on industrial and product design from the University of Technology, Sydney. They are respectively the CEO and Director of Food Recycle. We're also going to be watching a video of, to inform us about the workarounds of the incredible company. Welcome to our B.Talks, Norm and Brad.
Thank you. We would also like to thank the Business Council for this forum. Obviously, going to be very helpful for everyone, and we look forward to working with Brazil in rolling out this sort of technology quite soon. Thank you.
Thank you. So are we having our video now? Yes, yes, thank you.
Food waste is a global problem. It's a problem in every country in the world. Approximately 30% of food is wasted globally. If this waste makes it to landfill, it produces methane, a gas that is 20 to 30 times more harmful to the environment than carbon dioxide. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that 8% of global emissions can be attributed to food waste. This equates to $1 trillion a year and in effect wastes all the resources that have gone into producing the food. These resources are already stretched, yet the problem will only get worse as the world's population increases. Thankfully, there are some solutions out there that are making a real difference. In a lot of countries, there are some great charities that collect excess food and distribute it to those in need. Home composting has become more mainstream, making use of food scraps at home, and there are many preventative measures that have been successfully implemented across different industries. It is unfortunate, however, that the majority of food waste still goes to landfill. We don't believe that commercial composting is a viable alternative to solve this problem. Compost as an end product is of very little value. Even though it represents a very small percentage of the market, it is already a saturated market, further driving down the value. The other major issue that composting has encountered is the level of contamination. These contaminants are often not organic, so in the field they build up while the surrounding material breaks down. As a result, our local state of New South Wales has even banned the use of compost to grow any food due to the level of contaminants. Food Recycle has an alternative solution that we believe is viable to solve the global problem of food waste. Our process converts any commercial food waste into two high-value products: commercial grade poultry feed and liquid fertiliser. These products sell for over 30 times the price of compost and are in high demand around the world, with future demand only projected to increase. Our process revolves around a simple principle. Edible food is high in value because it has a high nutritional content. When comparing edible food to food waste, they have both been produced to a high standard using valuable resources to produce. They are both very high in nutrients and they are both very appealing to chickens. The main difference between edible food and food waste is simply that food waste has been discarded and can no longer be fed to humans. Instead of trying to convert the food to be used for another purpose, we are simply using the food as food, just further down the food chain. This, in effect, retains the value of its original purpose as it displaces raw ingredients used to produce animal feeds. What really separates any other food waste processing technologies is our business case. While compost produces an end product of very little value, the food recycle process produces two high-value products. The science behind our technology has been validated by the University of Western Sydney and the University of New England, both highly regarded in their respective fields. Research and development never ends, and we continue to invest in the technology. So how do we end up with commercial grade feed? When we sign up a waste producer, we classify them into one of 6 different waste streams. Each waste stream is processed separately into a shelf-stable product and the nutritional content measured. We then blend the different waste stream batches together to create a specifically formulated feed. To prove the process, we've produced a fully operational containerized pilot facility. This facility uses industrial scale equipment and has been used to produce actual feed that has been fed to chickens. The pilot facility consists of 5 containers, with each container demonstrating a stage in our process. From the demand side, there is never a shortage of demand for poultry feed. If we took all the food waste in the world and turned it into poultry feed, we would still not have enough to feed the chickens we have today, let alone the populations of tomorrow. It's also worth noting that the raw ingredients for poultry feed are traded commodities, which means the price of poultry feed is fairly constant around the world. We are currently performing ongoing research and development into producing different animal feeds that might better suit different facilities in different geographies. Food Recycle is in a unique position that it has the potential to significantly address 3 major world problems at the same time. Food security. With food recycled food replacing the raw ingredients of poultry feed, more resources are freed up to produce more food for human consumption, which is important when the world population is forecast to hit 9 billion people by 2050. For the world to continue its supply of protein, it will need to focus on animals with a lower feed to meat ratio. Global emissions. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that food waste is responsible for 8% of global emissions. By diverting the food waste from landfill, we are tackling half of the problem, shown in the orange column. Unique to the food recycle process is that the food waste also replaces the ingredients in poultry feed, which contribute to the blue column. With 3 of the main ingredients being wheat, soy, and barley, these are some of the ingredients with the highest carbon footprint. Biosecurity. With the current world situation, the importance of biosecurity has never been more acknowledged. It is not commonly known, but food waste can transmit a variety of viruses and diseases to animals that might consume it. One such virus is African swine fever. This virus has already taken out 1/4 of the world's pigs. The outbreak of foot and mouth disease in 2001 was traced back to a farmer feeding his pigs food waste. This ended up costing the UK economy tens of billions of dollars. Our process treats food waste for every major threat for no extra cost. As a business, each facility has multiple revenue streams and licenses the technology from a head licensee. Each head licensee owns the rights of the technology for a region, who in turn licenses the technology from Food Recycle. Royalties and license fees are paid, while generous profits are made by the facilities. Everyone wins. Let's talk about Brazil. Brazil is actually highly regarded worldwide for its initiatives in tackling food waste. The general population also see this as an important problem that needs to be addressed. It is estimated that Brazil produces around 40,000 tonnes of food waste a day. This equates to around 14 million tonnes annually. What is particularly interesting that only 10% of that figure is attributed to consumer waste and 90% is commercial food waste. From a feed perspective, Brazil is often referred to as the barn of the world and is one of the largest producers of both poultry and pigs in the world. The country produces over 13 million tonnes of poultry meat and 4.4 billion dozen eggs annually. 2019 is expected to have produced over 4 million tonnes of pig meat, the biggest year Brazil has ever had. Interestingly, a large component of that demand was due to an outbreak of African swine fever in China, killing half of its pig population. This obviously illustrates the need to mitigate biosecurity risks. For these reasons, we see Brazil as the perfect fit for the food recycle technology. The country has a large population in the hundreds of millions. A large percentage of food waste generated is commercial. There is strong public support to fight food waste. The country has a huge poultry and pig industry, which in turn needs to mitigate any potential biosecurity threats. We are looking for businesses and individuals to collaborate with. On the one hand, we are seeking companies that might want to own and operate a facility. And on the other hand, we are taking expressions of interest to become regional head licensees who will sell the technology and manage the licenses in the region. This is an exciting time to be in recycling. May I finish with this statement? Taking a waste stream that is costing the planet and turning it into a high-value product that the planet needs is practically the definition of creating value.
Mute. I am here. Terrific, very terrific. Congratulations, Norm. When I hear the word waste, it makes me think whether this is really, we should be talking about a different terminology, because when you think about waste, it's something that doesn't have a use. But what we're doing here is really, really amazing recycling of the world's production and all that it has good to provide. Thank you so much. We definitely would like to see food waste and technologies of the sort thriving in Brazil. we'll be more than happy to assist in any way we can with our council resources. We'll be discussing a bit more about the technology during the panel. So for the moment now, to our honorable guests for the agenda action and for the work they've been doing development of the bilateral relations between Australia and Brazil. So now we conclude the initial remarks of our guests, and I'd like to invite Gleuto back to proceed with the panel.
Well, thank you, Flavia, and thank you for all the speakers and presenters today. It is a pleasure, to see, such a good material in there. We have had quite a few questions throughout the presentations and the talks today. We'll actually come to them in a second. I would like to perhaps just go through. We have quite a limited time in here, but the next few minutes we'll try to cover all the questions that we have. This, as I said before, this webinar has been recorded so that you will be able to access some of those answers a little bit later. But I would like to proceed to some of the questions in here that have been posted to us. And first, I would like to go back to Rodrigo Lima there, and perhaps have a question here. And the question that was posed is, how important is to strengthen the sanitary international standards related to agriculture and food safety at the post-COVID? And also, I think to add to that question in there is that one of our listeners says that is the sanitary international standards the concern when we actually have so much corruption on this international trade? So maybe you can elaborate on both of them in there.
Thanks so much for the question, and thanks for putting Gleuto. Yeah, my basically final remark is that very, very important producing countries like of animal protein should strive to get to the FAO, to get to the SPS committee at the WTO, to the Codex Alimentarius, to the International Plant Protection Convention, and so on, to raising the value of sanitary and phytosanitary standards. Because if countries start to adopt their own standards and the less internationally recognized and applicable standards we have worldwide, I think the more trade issues we will have globally, right? And probably the management of zoonoses and diseases and so on will be harder and difficult. So I really believe that the OIE right now gains a lot of attention, and as an organization working together with the FAO and the World Human Health Organization also, because these interrelations about known diseases, when countries know, when there's a lot of scientific information about a disease and countries know how to manage, there's vaccines and there's practices and so on, this is easier, right? The challenge is how to do that everywhere and to spread this knowledge in these technologies and so on. But I really, and because of that, I really believe that this COVID-19 puts a lot of pressure to the sanitary agenda, and countries like Brazil and Australia has a strong voice towards improving how international standards and their organizations will move in the next years, especially when we have trade issues related, attached to the diseases. So the point of corruption, I think, you know, this OIE, for example, is composed by the countries. Like so countries must really, I think, recreate this post COVID-19 agenda, really trying to strive common goals and challenges towards the diseases and especially zoonoses. And then I would put the issue of wet markets and consumption of wild animals as something that that for Australia and Brazil and some other countries may not be a huge issue, but I believe a lot of people in the room had a chance to travel to some country with a wet market and to visit a wet market, and this is really challenging when you are talking about spreading diseases and zoonoses and so on. So I really believe that the international standardization process, it's very important at the international level with the countries. And then there's also the companies' initiatives, like we have the Global Food Safety Initiative at the Consumer Goods Forum, for instance, as a very important example of how companies move on those agenda also.
I appreciate that, Rodrigo, and I think it was a very comprehensive answer in there. I also, you mentioned throughout your answer in there that it requires a lot of work from the countries to actually, you know, understand about the diseases, so that it becomes some kind of an issue that can be addressed, and actually that affects trade throughout that process. Now, one of our members in here, who we have been speaking for quite a little while, Ricardo Fiot, he actually placed a question which goes a little bit further to what you were saying. And I wanted to actually put the question here because we do have representatives from both governments in here, Australia and Brazil. The question was, what does the Brazilian government or the Australia needs to do to break the non-tariff barrier to include the Brazil into the Australia's now FMD free list of countries? But one of the things that has been causing the problem here is that have been no cases of foot and mouth disease in Brazil since 2006, and nothing else now should prevent the business in this sector, now meat and dairy products between both countries. But we still blocked from actually trade any dairy products from Brazil into Australia, for example. And in the aspect of actually understanding the disease and actually eliminating it and going through the process, it seems to me like there is more than just understanding the issue of sanitary regulations, but more like an impasse. We don't seem to be able to break through some of the walls that actually hold this bureaucracy to actually, you know, kind of open and free these markets. And I know that we have Ambassador Sergio Lima over there, which we spoke about this before, and he's just a guest today, and Joaquim, who is actually on the trade here. Perhaps one of you could probably help us to understand and explain to the people what are the processes that are required, and what is the way that we actually have to break through when the disease comes through, and how can we actually re-bring this back into trade so that we can break this barrier down. And perhaps I would like to ask Ambassador Lima to actually perhaps, you know, initiate that answer, and then I'll go back to Joaquim, Penna, perhaps to elaborate a bit. You are on mute, Mr. Ambassador. Unfortunately, you are on mute. Okay, so go ahead.
Perhaps just instead of focusing on a specific question, what I can see is that there is, taking into account all the questions that have been the presentations made and the questions raised, I have in my mind no doubt that it would be very useful to establish a sort of a private, public Australia-Brazil forum on agriculture and biosecurity. I don't know if this could be done within within the Joint Business Council, but I think there is a need to establish something that would allow a continuous debate and discussion to establish a network linking Brazil and Australia, perhaps within, at least to start with, within the Council. This would give us a chance to better understand, because you have some concerns, biosecurity concerns, but you have also the use of some legitimate biosecurity concerns in a way that gives the impression that you are protecting your own companies from undesirable competition. And I think that so sometimes the industry tries to fill all the concerns and the requests made by governments, but you don't see the result of that. And I think we are sensible to the question that has been raised, and we have taken them to the proper Australian authorities, and we are raising the level of our discussion specifically on this matter, and we call the attention of the Brazilian government on this specific issue, and so as to see how we can move on in our conversations with the Australian government.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I think it's important. It is on our agenda to actually expand an arm of this agribusiness side of things and into the council. And I will follow up later with you in relation to connecting an interest group to form perhaps a component to address this issue. I would like to bring Joaquim Penna into this conversation, because we've been talking about trade, and we've been talking about opening markets and using different technologies. And I will ask Joaquim Penna, is it being seen throughout the trade division of the consulate, and here the SECOM division from the Brazilian government, a movement towards using technology or using has means to facilitate this breaking through of these barriers that we have seen lately? What has been your experience in that department, Joaquim? You are on mute, by the way. Okay, that's okay.
Thank you, Gleuto. Oh, I think that's all very interesting to think about how technology could help, especially I think in agribusiness. I think both Australia and Brazil have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience in producing and using technology in the field, and both in the farm and outside of the farm, between the farm and the market, and the farm and the government. And I reminded something that I learned last year in our Agribusiness Innovation Forum. Is that something that it's another example of complementarity between Brazil and Australia in agribusiness. That Brazil, well, both countries are good, both in the farm and outside of the farm in agribusiness. But Brazil is especially good inside the farm in technology that's used to produce more efficiently and more productively inside the farm, both animal protein or other products. But Australia is very, very good also in things that are between the farm and the market, and between the farm and the regulator. And Brazil could learn a lot from Australia. And one of the areas that Brazil could learn from Australia, and there's a lot of potential for cooperation there, it's technology in or policy frameworks, to be more clear, used to in relation to food security or biosecurity, food safety, things like that. I think Australia is a country that is an avant-garde in these issues, and would be very useful to Brazil if some cooperation was used there. But Brazil also has a lot to teach Australia in a way, or to help Australia in areas like biofuels, including the policy framework used to make biofuels so widespreadly used in Brazil as it is.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Joaquim. And I think following from what you said in there, I would like to bring John Berry back now, because, and I have a question for him, because he's, in this case, we have an operator here in Australia that has been probably using a lot of technologies that have been exchanged between the two countries. And the question that I have for you, John, would be, what kind of opportunities and developments are there around technology and innovation that JBS in Australia is using, for example, that could help, that is helping on those areas, Nick?
Thanks, Gleuto. Yes, I think all the speakers have acknowledged that both Brazil and Australia have capacity to work stronger together and to develop opportunities through technology, whether that be on farm through producing beef on grass or in feed yards in a more efficient way, industry systems, or in terms of technology in our processing and food production facilities. From our perspective, and I see one of the questions there, post-COVID, yes, technology will continue to be where the opportunity is to drive not just productivity, but also systems which deliver the end customer confidence in the quality of the food we're producing. So in the case of JBS, as I said earlier, we've invested significantly in our Scott technology platform, which has historically been based around robotic technology. But we see that the platforms we have picking up on technology which is appropriate from other parts of the world, including Brazil, North America, Europe, etc., and implementing that or including that within our robotic technology systems certainly will give a stronger platform to cover most of the supply chain. I think we need to make sure that the integration of technology delivers the quality of results that we have. It doesn't complicate things.
Very good. And so has the COVID-19 played any changes on the way that you use technology, John?
Good question. Probably one thing that it will review is where we have people operating within our food and meat production businesses going forward. Are there roles that we can redesign with the use of technology, taking people out of that process? That's something we're clearly looking at. It's not that unit of labour won't be lost. It's about retraining and skilling up people into new roles within the business. But yes, technology is part of it. And I see that with COVID, post-COVID, that more and more the opportunity exists for Brazil, US and Australia to lead the way in the implementation of technology within these food and meat processing facilities.
Very good. No, thank you very much for your input on that one there. Perhaps I would like to bring Norm to actually talk a little bit in here, and I would like to say, Norm, that we have had a good thumbs up in here on our polling that we actually have for the video, so that a lot of people are saying that they would like to have access to that, and perhaps what I would like to say to the people, that I believe that you will make this video available to the attendees so that they can actually receive that again. But I got a question for you there. You mentioned in the video of the food recycling that Brazil is a perfect fit, and perhaps either you or Brad could expand a little bit on that for us, and tell us why do you think so, and how can this be executed?
Sure, I'll field that one. So yeah, we see huge opportunity in Brazil, both from supply and demand. Being obviously one of the largest producers of food in the world, or protein at least. But the big thing for us is that 90% of food waste in Brazil is actually commercial food waste. Most countries, that's not the case. So the big opportunity we see is you've got both supply of commercial food waste and a lot of demand for feed. And the big strength of our process is that we can basically deliver any formulation of feed required. So that can be for poultry, we mentioned in the video, but we also have feeds available for pigs and aquaculture.
Well, thank you, Brad. That's good. And I would assume that throughout this process, is this going to be just applicable regional, or are you actually contemplating that besides the software and the platform and the way that the program that you have, is there any plans for export and import of waste from country to country, or that is not a discussed solution?
So that's actually exactly where we see it heading. At least in the immediate future, we see local markets being the main end product, but there's absolutely no reason that you couldn't see this as being a traded commodity in itself. And as an example, with beef produce and abattoirs, you've got a lot of cow hides left over. You could turn that into high protein and basically trade that as an ingredient to some of these facilities to actually turn into feeds for other animals. So we see that as a massive opportunity moving forward, is not just between facilities, but between countries.
Okay, very good. And perhaps this is a good segue for us to actually bring Linda back in here to have the final remarks in there. When you actually look at the discussion about first is sanitary issues between these allocations of protein and so on, and then we talked about waste, and we talked about COVID-19 and so on. Is your platform, or is one of the roadways to actually also keep track of the sanitary requirements now when you're actually transporting protein from one place to another? And is that following, you mentioned in your talk, from end to end, so which means from the farm all the way to the consumer. So in that case, what are the points that you have in relation to the sanitary requirements now globally?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So AXIchain actually tracks two traceable areas. So first of all, you've got the trade in itself, which has all the documentation and the paperwork. And so often, with fraud and failure around the documentation side is where you end up with issues, potentially. So streamlining the actual trade itself and over time reducing the amount of documentation required to authenticate that deal. But then from a food security point of view, tracking the products from farm. So using and tracking the product from farm, you have to start right from the birth of the animal. So bringing that data, putting the data into the system, like a funnel, if you will, and then pulling all of that information all the way through the system to the abattoir and then out to the other side, and using technology to track the food and the product itself in its journey.
Okay, this is a very interesting. I am in the area of technology as well, so we do a lot of use of the blockchain technology for making sure that documentation is not actually tampered with. We have one of the persons that I welcome here in the beginning, Samantha Drew. She runs UEarth, and I think you guys probably should connect because it's very interesting now the aspect. And we've been talking about issues of corruption on international trade, and people actually giving wrong documentation, or some countries actually, you know, falsifying some of the paperwork or even the products to actually, you know, get it to the markets. And I really welcome, you know, the use of technology, and I can see that, you know, that you are on the right path in there. And I believe that for us to break away from having another COVID-19 in the future, I think these elements of understanding and traceability and maybe, you know, transparency of the whole transaction is extremely important for the sustainability of humanity. And I you know, would like to say that I think AXIchain is on the right path. And I can see Samantha actually smiling in there, because I think it touches to the heart of a lot of us, as we actually trust the food that we are eating in front of us, and making sure that we can verify its origins, and we know that the whole known path of possibility of any corruption through this process of documentation is eliminated when we use the proper technology. Look, we are running out of time, and we need to wrap this up. I understand this is a very relevant topic, and we could probably be discussing here for a few more hours to actually now bring all these things together. But what I would like to say is that I would like to thank you all for being here today. And I want to thank our very special guests and speakers for your generous contribution, and congratulate on your amazing work that you guys are doing. This is basically just the beginning of this forum discussion. I would like to perhaps open a forum within our council to continue to work about these biosecurity, agribusiness, and some of the other sectors that will follow from that. So I want to remind you all that 2020, we celebrate the 75th years of diplomatic relations between the two countries. And it's a good time for us to actually perhaps stress and put a little bit more focus into these two countries, and do a lot more from that. So feel free to email us any comments or feedbacks that you may have. If you like to become a member, you can contact our team as well to discuss it, and then we'll be able to bring these things together and more subjects that we can discuss. Our next B.Talks is going to be in 4 weeks from now, and stay tuned, because we will be letting you know what is the next subject. And I appreciate you all being here today, and all the people attending these B.Talks. We would like to make it a little bit more interesting, so I appreciate those questions that were done. We will actually have to answer them via email and via the forum, so we'll present them in there. We'll open that, and we'll continue the discussion. So thank you very, very much for everything. Thank our panel for talking and attending now this seminar. It has been a great time with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for the invitation.
Have a great day. Goodbye.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.